Consider two systems attempting the same task. One is a blind, slow, random walk. The other is a marvel of engineering. Intricate gears spinning at high speed, perfectly locked in a loop that never touches the drive shaft. We assume that catastrophic failure is the result of a breakdown in the machine. However, empirical evidence suggests that the most intractable, profound errors are generated by systems with the highest computational power and the greatest access to data. Our colloquial definitions equate stupidity with a low IQ, a simple vacancy of thought. But classical psychometrics fail to explain how high-functioning systems construct their own monumental failures. True stupidity requires activity. An inert object or a simple thermostat cannot be stupid because they lack the representational capacity needed to build and defend a false model of reality. Stupidity represents the active, sophisticated misuse of cognitive machinery to take a simple problem and make it impossible to solve. To study these failures scientifically, cognitive systems theorist David Krakauer developed a formal taxonomy that maps cognitive behaviors onto physical and mathematical laws. His framework separates cognition into 4 distinct states that behave according to different rules: ignorance, error, intelligence, and stupidity. We need a way to distinguish between a system that lacks data, one that temporarily misinterprets data, and one that uses new information to actively degrade its own performance. We can express these relationships mathematically. We define the performance of a rule system by its probability of success, P, which is dependent upon the volume of available data, D. This taxonomy provides the specific categories needed to identify the structural causes behind a system's collapse. And in this framework, ignorance is a complete insufficiency of data. Without input, the system defaults to a random walk algorithm, testing variables blindly. This chart plots probability against data volume. An ignorant system shows a slow, jagged, upward trajectory. While inefficient, it eventually stumbles into the correct state, touching the ceiling. Error behaves differently, a temporary distortion where probability drops abruptly, then recovers. An erroneous system retains its epistemic flexibility. When exposed to high-fidelity data, it recalibrates its assumptions and corrects its path. In both ignorance and error, the defect is cured by reality. Because they respond to data, they remain stable, workable states. True intelligence deploys an adaptive rule to compress a massive problem space, like the 43 quintillion configurations of a Rubik's Cube, down to a manageable sequence, minimizing the effort required to solve it. For an intelligent system, marginal return on data is positive, pushing success toward 100, but a localized light bulb turns that exact same rule into a deadly tightening spiral. Psychologist Daniel Kahneman's dual process theory divides the mind into the unconscious heuristics of System 1 and the deliberate analysis of System 2. Cognitive pathology begins when System 1 locks on to a flawed, obsolete, or environmentally mismatched rule. Instead of intervening to correct the error, System 2 is hijacked. It deploys analytical power to construct rationalizations, actively cherry-picking data to defend flawed heuristics. This mimics parasitic cooptation in biology. Fungal parasites hack the nervous systems of ants, forcing the host to execute perfectly coordinated physical actions entirely designed to kill the host and spread spores. High analytical processing power offers no protection against this. When co-opted, a brilliant mind simply builds an impenetrable, data-rich intellectual fortress around a flawed premise. When these pathological rules are scaled up to the level of national economies or scientific paradigms, the potential for systemic failure increases exponentially. Brilliant minds often defend false propositions. Lord Kelvin used thermodynamics to prove heavier-than-air flight was impossible just years before the Wright brothers took off. At the institutional level, this manifests as the cybernetic trap, the habit of modeling complex adaptive systems as simple mechanical feedback loops. Management consultant Stafford Beer's Project Cybersyn, deployed in 1970s Chile under Salvador Allende, serves as the case study for this scaling error. Cybersyn attempted to manage an entire national economy in real time through centralized algorithms. It tried to force the nonlinear reality of millions of independent agents into a rigid, mechanical framework. As evolutionary biologist Stephen A. Frank describes mathematically, when agents are forced into poorly structured institutions, behavioral correlation drops. They are incentivized to outcompete their neighbors, driving the collective system toward collapse. Powerful, rigid institutions act under a spell of power. They transmute the technical competence of their individual members into an engine of collective civilizational irrationality. Today, these formal scaling laws of cognitive failure map perfectly onto the deployment of modern artificial intelligence architectures. As computational power increases, so does the scale of potential error. Artificial intelligence architectures are creating the first instances of super stupidity. Large language models are the primary vulnerability. They aren't optimized for objective truth. They are probability engines trained to prioritize structural plausibility and linguistic appeal. In the Krakauer framework, an AI hallucination rigorously defends a false reality. These models consume immense processing power and ingest massive streams of new data, only to reroute it to double down on an incorrect output. Highly persuasive, algorithmically amplified engines of uncorrectable stupidity represent the primary existential risk of modern AI. This leaves us a final paradox. If elegant, intelligent rules compress the problem space so efficiently, why do they ultimately fail in complex adaptive environments? We model this as a non-convex fitness landscape, a rugged 3D map with small hills and one towering peak. An elegant gradient descent algorithm climbs the nearest slope efficiently and stops, trapped. Escaping this local maximum mathematically requires suboptimal, high-energy random exploration. This mathematical necessity maps directly back to the architecture of human civilization and our institutions. When we attempt to enforce shared, centralized values or impose rigid cybernetic control mechanisms, we strip away the messy exploration that keeps us adaptable. We force the entire society onto a single, precarious local peak. To survive in a highly complex reality, our institutions and algorithms must abandon the pursuit of singular elegance. We must engineer diverse ecosystems that rely on messy, uncorrelated exploration to discover the best path forward.